First Lady of the United States, accompanied by Postmaster General Louis DeJoy, Susan Ford Bales, and Dr. Joseph Lee.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jill Biden, First Lady of the United States, for hosting this event. I have the distinct pleasure of announcing that the United States Postal Service will issue a first-class mail forever stamp honoring the life and legacy of First Lady Betty Ford. Through our stamp program, the Postal Service commemorates and celebrates the very best of America. Betty Ford was a remarkable First Lady and a remarkable person, and she represents the very best of America. In many ways, Betty Ford changed the role of being that First Lady. She raised the public's consciousness of a range of issues. Our nation certainly benefited from her voice and her views. In 1974, Betty Ford underwent a mastectomy operation. Her choice to publicize her ordeal sparked a surge in mammograms in the United States, no doubt saving many lives and making regular breast cancer screening a regular practice for millions of women. Few people in the public eye today would open up about their private struggles with painkiller addiction. And yet, in 1978, Betty Ford brought attention to her private problem and her recovery to lift the veil of shame. She did so for the benefit of all those suffering, but not seeking help. She later helped establish the Betty Ford Center for Substance Dependency, lending her name and energies to spark greater visibility for the drug rehabilitation services that was so widely needed then and unfortunately now. Betty Ford was a force for good, and her weapons were openness and honesty. She was a devoted partner to her husband and a devoted public servant. To recognize her many contributions to our nation, we will officially issue the Betty Ford Commemorative Forever postage stamp on April 5th. A dedication ceremony will be held at Eisenhower Health in Rancho Mirage, California. The Postal Service is proud to honor First Lady Betty Ford. Thank you. And now I would like to invite those on stage to join me in revealing this new stamp. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Joseph Lee, who serves as the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation and is one of the most sought-after thought leaders on addiction and treatment and mental health care in the world. Please welcome Dr. Lee.
Thank you, Dr. Biden, Postmaster General DeJoy, and Susan, for the honor of joining all of you today for this exciting and special occasion. I'm so grateful to be here. And thank you to the Postal Service for paying tribute to a remarkable woman and a great American who continues to inspire people around the globe. If I can leave you with one thing today, it's this: the Betty Ford spirit is alive and well. Her influence continues to loom large, just as her elegant image does in this room today. At the Betty Ford Center in California, right now, patients and their family members are walking the same grounds that Mrs. Ford walked for nearly 3 decades. They are beginning to break through, overcoming substance use and mental health challenges. They are transforming their lives with possibilities beyond the imagination. Today, Betty Ford's impact extends through an entire national network of Hazelden Betty Ford treatment sites, as well as a graduate school, a research center, a publishing arm. We work very hard to be the best and to do so with love, because that is the standard she set for us. On behalf of our board and employees and all the patients and families touched by Mrs. Ford's leadership, we are so proud and privileged to carry forward her legacy. In this country, as we all know, we are still facing tremendous stigma with regard to mental health and substance use issues. But Betty Ford made sure that addiction was not seen as a second-class illness for second-class citizens. Instead, she sent a powerful message that everyone on the journey of recovery deserves dignity and quality health care. That's a message I hope will be conveyed every time someone uses this stamp and sees it on an envelope. And even more broadly, I hope the stamp sends an optimistic message to everyone that we can overcome difficult challenges that impact our families and communities by working together. In the spirit of Mrs. Ford's impact across America, we at Hazelden Betty Ford are proud to announce our 75th anniversary this year, and we'll save a seat for anyone who wants to join us in September. I'll close with this. Throughout history, there are times throughout history when courageous people stand up. And when courageous people stand up, they change the conversation for the entire country. Betty Ford did that for breast cancer and for addiction. Where there was only shame and loneliness and despair, she replaced it with hope and dignity and compassion and community and equity. For the first time, due to her actions and her words, millions of people across the country felt seen, felt heard for the very first time. That is why Betty Ford is a national treasure. And that is why all of us feel inspired for a lifetime to carry on that charge. Thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce Hazelden Betty Ford's beloved trustee, the daughter of Betty Ford and President Gerald Ford, Susan Ford Bales.
Dr. Biden, Postmaster General DeJoy, Dr. Lee, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, what an exciting day. Thank you to the Postmaster General DeJoy and the United States Postal Service. The stamp, in a word, is beautiful. Mom would be so happy with it. So on behalf of Mom, my heartfelt gratitude goes to everyone at the Postal Service for making this stamp a shining example. Dr. Biden, I cannot express how grateful I am for your kindness in hosting this ceremony. Thank you for your great works here in America and around the world that you carry out with such strength and grace. Mom and Dad would be so proud, as I am, that you are our nation's First Lady. Thank you, Dr. Biden, from the bottom of my heart. Ladies and gentlemen, it's great to be back home. But it's also really exciting to be back in the East Room. This room is where my high school classmates and I held our senior prom. And a reminder, all the information about the after prom party up on the 3rd floor that night is still highly classified. It is super duper top secret. Not even the president knows. But return with me now to an autumn afternoon in 1974 to a small room upstairs in the family quarters. That afternoon, my exciting life in the White House was shattered. My mother took me aside and whispered 4 words to me. I have breast cancer. And in those days, her diagnosis was grim. Mom likely was going to die. But the unavoidable fear, the kind that reaches down into the pit of your stomach, was wrenching. And just because we were sitting here in the White House and Mom, the First Lady, didn't help one bit. I recall Mom's conversation with Dad and me about whether to share her diagnosis and mastectomy with the public. Should she announce that she has cancer? Should anyone, much less the First Lady, dare say the word breast in public? How much should we talk about this? Something so personal to any woman, cancer of the breast. My mom's reaction was swift. No way. Mom ought to be able to deal with this privately with her life-threatening diagnosis. I wanted her to do what so many other women had done, simply mention that she was having so-called female problems and would undergo exploratory surgery. She bluntly disagreed. She said, "The time for women hiding this disease in shame and behind closed doors has to stop. And who better to make that happen than the First Lady of the United States?" So Mom announced to the public exactly, and I mean exactly, what was happening to her. She took the brave yet controversial step and told the world the truth about her disease. And with those same 4 words she whispered to me, my mom announced that she had breast cancer. Instantly, the arc of women's health and the future lives of tens of millions of women has been changed forever. And in addition, the moment marked a permanent transformation of the role and the public expectations of our First Ladies. 4 years later, Dad and our family had another jarring conversation with Mom. We explained to her the devastating effects that her addiction in prescription pain medicines and alcohol were having on Mom and all of us. She bravely entered treatment, and the rest of it, as they say, is history. Back then, stigma of prescription and alcohol addiction was cynical, as it was cruel. Most often, it was confused incorrectly with individual moral failure, and a failure caused solely by personal choice. Nevertheless, Mom refused to hide in the dark of secrecy and shame. Instead, she went public. And oh, do I mean she went public. She candidly discussed her condition and treatment. She demonstrated by word and deed that in seeking treatment, what some might call for personal weakness is in truth the hopeful pathway to renewal. But Mom didn't stop with her public announcement. She and Ambassador Firestone created the Betty Ford Center, a treatment facility that 4 decades ago is still recognized around the globe as a gold standard for treatment and of those suffering from substance use disorder, and most importantly, for their families and their children. In reflecting on Mom's enduring legacy, historian Richard Norton Smith concluded, "Where women's health issues are concerned, the American history is divided in 2 very unequal periods, before Betty and after Betty." Today, the Postal Service and the American people pay tribute to a woman of extraordinary courage and candor, to a transformative First Lady, and to a devoted wife. And in doing so, they honor a woman that today and in every tomorrow, I am so proud to call my mom. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me in this tribute. So in closing, please permit me a personal reflection. Recalling the words of President John Adams etched on the fireplace mantel just down the hall. I pray heaven to bestow the best of blessings on this house, on the First Lady, Jill Biden, and President Joe Biden, and the entire First family. May God bless and keep you all safe, and the men and women of the Postal Service and the nation that they serve with dedication and integrity. And may God's perpetual light watch over Betty Ford and her husband, Gerald R. Ford. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, Susan. In your words and in your career, it's clear how much of your mom's humor, strength, and love for this country lives on in you. And I'm also grateful to have many other members of the Ford family with us today. I know we have several of First Lady Ford's friends here as well. So thank you all so much for joining us. Postmaster General DeJoy, that stamp is beautiful. It's spectacular. And Dr. Lee and the rest of the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation, I'm grateful that you're carrying on Betty Ford's work. So I'm excited to welcome all of you to the White House for this special moment. You know, there is no roadmap for becoming a First Lady, let alone becoming one overnight, as she did with everything in her life. Betty Ford threw herself into the new role. And I'm quoting her, "If we have to go to the White House, okay, I will go," Mrs. Ford told her husband, "but I'm going as myself. And if they don't like it, they'll just have to throw me out." It turned out that Betty, as herself, was her trademark candor, wit, and lack of pretense. And that was exactly what the country needed. A warm, charming, friendly First Lady who would help restore a weary nation's faith in government. Betty's time in the White House may have been brief, but her mark was lasting. She was unafraid to speak her mind. She supported legalized abortion and was a vocal advocate for the Equal Rights Amendment. When her husband's senior advisors complained about Betty placing calls from the White House lobby to the ERA, she installed her own personal phone line. And in a remarkable display of courage and vulnerability, she went public about her breast cancer and mastectomy at a time when things were just only whispered about. And as she lay in a hospital bed in Bethesda, she watched news programs beaming footage of women lining up at hospitals to get their screenings too. She didn't think, what she did was revolutionary. She was simply being Betty. Forthright, honest, and relatable. Countless women would owe their lives to following her example. After Mrs. Ford left the White House, she bared her soul once more, revealing her battle with addiction. Just as she had done many times before, she brought light into a place of darkness, sharing her own demons, giving countless others the strength to confront their own. You have to give it away to keep it. That mantra would become one of the guiding lights behind the creation of the Betty Ford Center. Mrs. Ford's extraordinary story is a lesson in the beautiful and sometimes cruel unpredictability of life and our capacity for redemption. Her journey reminds us that we are not defined by our worst moments, but rather by our ability to turn life's inevitable pain and struggle into purpose and salvation. Heroism is not perfection, it's resilience. Ultimately, Betty gave us hope. Hope that tomorrow is a brighter day. Hope that this too shall pass. Hope that even in the depths of despair, the human will is limitless. As many at the Betty Ford Center would say, if Betty can do it, I can do it. Mrs. Ford once wrote that to be remembered with joy is a kind of immortality. I'm sure if she were with us today, she would offer a witty quip about being immortalized with her own forever stamp. Susan, it is an honor to celebrate your mom today. She inspired a nation and captured our hearts for an eternity. Thank you.